Welcome to my next 10, my number 90 through 81 favorite board games of all time. Welcome back. What can I say? This is a list that is primarily not heavier games. I don't know what happened. I know I like to think of myself as someone who is primarily a heavy gamer who just happens to be surrounded with people who are just not smart enough to play the games that I normally want to play. And that, really, people should commit to Vito Lacerda as their personal lord and board game savior. But for whatever reason, these games are just a little bit lighter. A lot of them are just more medium weights, but only one of them sits on my shelves, of which I have divided into lightweight, which is behind me, medium weight, and heavy. And only one of those games sits on the heavy shelf, and it's not even close to the heaviest one on that shelf. So let's get started with these ones. Hi, monkey. Photo bomber. My number 90 is a game called Creature Comforts, and it's entirely appropriate that my cat monkey is currently crashing my very sophisticated set here. As I talk about this, because it's all about the animal creatures and the sorts of human-y things that they get into, I suppose. They're anthropomorphic. They're clearly people that happen to be hedgehogs and mice and so on. I played it once. It made enough of an impression that it made my list. It is new to my list, as you might imagine. Its weight is about a 4 out of 10 and plays 2 to 4 players. There might be a solo mode. I would have to look it up. But it doesn't seem to be the kind of game that I would endeavor to play solo. It just might be solo because everything's trending towards having a solo mode these days anyways. I also felt like I'm not sure I would want to play it at 4 necessarily. And I think I might even go to 5. Again, I would have to look this up. Should I have looked up this before this video? No, because this is the video you're going to get. Creature Comforts is a sort of worker placement, dice placement game. Except you sort of just pick your spots and then you assign the dice to them after they've been rolled. So you just sort of hope that you get the right combination. It's an interesting little puzzle. I think it plays to an appropriate length at 2. And again, there's some hesitation that I have about adding too many more players on top of that. I just thought it was a lovely little bit of art. It was a very breezy design. It felt very sort of effortlessly done game. I liked that there were special abilities that were kicking in special spots that could go every round. I liked that the resources that were available kept changing. I liked that there was some set collection stuff for the things you were cashing your resources in for. The art was just very charming and lovely. I kind of want to get a copy. I think this is a game that would be a hit with my family. And it's also a game that I feel is just very strong on 2 players. So it makes my list, and I'd be happy to play it again. I'll probably look to find a retail copy of this at some point. It's also by a local designer. Roberta Taylor is someone who I believe lives in the Edmonton area, but I'm not certain about that. I've definitely seen her around the city a little bit. So that is my number 90, Creature Comforts. My number 89 is Nita Lair, which is new to the list. Its weight is about a 3 out of 10 and will play 2 to 5 players. What's interesting to me about Nita Lair is that it's actually kind of similar to a game that I was designing. Nita Lair is a game in which you have these tokens which give you different bid amounts and you put them on different sets of cards. It's not completely identical to the game that I was designing, which is good because I wouldn't like to see a game that already exists doing what I worked hard at designing myself. My game had you bid for sets of cards and then you would take a whole bunch of them. Need of Lair, though, is a game in which it plays decently quickly. This is about 45 minutes on the box, and that seems about right. That isn't terribly overly complicated. That lets you sort of approach things with different strategies, that lets you collect different things for different ways of scoring points. it's just a fair amount of strategy for not a terribly large amount of rules overhead, and sometimes that's what I'm looking for. Sometimes I'm looking for a game that's punchy without being a lot of rules to burden other players with. I keep suggesting it, and it keeps not getting taken up as a suggestion for game nights. Maybe I'll bring this with me to the next game night that I have tomorrow as well. But I think everyone around me just needs to play this game more. It's very good. It's and I see no reason why they shouldn't love it as much as I do. Amazing game. My number 89, Need of Lair. My number 88 is Heaven and Ale, and Heaven and Ale is the only game on this list that actually comes from my heavy shelf. Its previous ranking was 63. Its weight is about a 7 out of 10, so again, not incredibly complex. And it will play 2 to 4 players. Need of Lair, sorry, I still have Need of Lair on the brain. Heaven and Ale is a game that is a tile layer in which you're laying tiles on your own particular little board, and one half gives you one type of upgrade, I believe money, and the other half gives you more points. And you have to kind of balance these, and then you have to make different patterns in order to get different kinds of bonuses. And then you're going on a rondel on a board, and you can go forward, but you can never go back. It's neat. It's an interesting combination of things. I think the thing it's really missing, though, is just a more attractive presentation. I like the idea of having a game about monks, but like the other game about monks that I've been talking about, Biblios, the theme ain't exactly deeply integrated. You don't get to get a real sense of a monk's life from Heaven and Ale. It's about monks brewing beer. Honestly, that's the kind of thematic game that I think I would be into. Like, if you gave me a heavily thematic game where the theme was monks brewing beer, I'd be into that. And I don't even drink beer. However, what you do have here is a pretty solid little tile-laying Euro game that doesn't overstay its welcome, that gives you a nice sort of puzzly feel that you're often looking for in games of this nature, and that I think is just really hard to pull out because who is asking for this specific game? I think it's the closest you have are people who are into heavier Euro games, and I'm not sure this is the weight class that most people are looking for in their heavier work. Or I think people are looking for something a little heavier if they're looking for a heavy Euro game. So anyways, that is my number 88, Heaven and Ale. And in case I didn't mention it, its previous rank was 63, its weight is a 7, and it's 2 to 4 players. My number 87 is Blood Rage. Blood Rage was previously ranked an 81, so hasn't really fallen far at all. Its weight is about a 6 out of 10, and it plays 2 to 4 players, although there's a 5-player expansion, and I also don't know why you would necessarily want to play Blood Rage at 5 players. Blood Rage is a game that is, I think, a war game, Ameritrash a little bit style game that makes Euro concessions, and I'm here for that. I think when you look at the games that are considered more thematic heavy games in my collection, often they have Euro elements in there, and that's kind of just what I'm looking for, because I'm looking for games that sort of smooth over the rough edges. I don't mind the idea of going head-to-head with people. I don't mind the idea of attacking other people. But I kind of want that element of, well, maybe I can find a clever way to turn that to my advantage. And Blood Rage has the infamous Loki strategy where you try to lose your way to victory. The fact that that's in here, although I haven't personally played that way, speaks well to this is the kind of game that I would play, even if my tastes tend to skew towards more pure Euros more often than not. It's just a fun game. I think card drafting games, which this is, where you're drafting the cards that you're actually going to use before each of the game's 3 rounds, are fun. I think they're interesting. I think the miniatures are entertaining to have on the board. I think the combat where it's simultaneously selection and the reveal, I think that's a great mechanism, and I would honestly like to see that in more games, if anything. There's just a lot to like about this, and even if it isn't the game that I might typically recommend, or the game I would typically want to play on game night. It's one I'm always very happy when I do get a chance to play it, and it's an entertaining game at, I'd say, 2, 3, and 4 players. I would recommend this. This is the kind of game that I think, if you're in the wheelhouse of the type of game that this is, you're just gonna love this. But if you're not, if you're like me, if you're someone whose tastes tend to skew more towards Euro style games, I think you will still like a lot about this game, and I think you'll appreciate that it's not just about rolling dice and like bashing people with the highest possible number. There's no dice rolling at all in this game, for that matter, and I think honestly it's better off for it. But then again, I am not an Ameritrash game designer, so take my opinions on that with a grain of salt. That, however, is my number 87, Blood Rage. My number 86 is Small World. Small World is another area control fighty game, but this one is much more of a pure Euro game than Blood Rage is, rather than just being more American style game that just happens to have some Euro design elements. This one is it's a pure Euro that just happens to have you going after each other, but the way you go after each other is completely deterministic, so that's very Euro in the way that part is implemented. Small World is a game about combinations. You pick a race that has its own intrinsic special ability, and it also is randomly matched with one of a bunch of possible special abilities that are included in the game. So you could have, as are on the back here, the underworld humans, or the spirit trolls, and the commando ghouls, and so on. That's all well and good. But the interesting part is just how are you going to turn that into cash? Because the more cash you have, that's basically all you're going for in the game. Controlling territories gives you it, but sometimes so do your special powers, so maybe you have to play to those. It scales extremely well. I would play this at 2, 3, 4, or 5. By the way, this is previously ranked on my list at 72, so it's only slipped a little bit. Its weight is about a 5 and plays 2 to 5 players, and plays 2 to 5 players basically equally well. It's just a kind of solid all-around game for me to have, because I think I can just use it in a lot of different situations. I just haven't had a chance to play it again very recently. Again, we're still sort of coming out of the pandemic at this point, so some of the game opportunities that I was used to having before the pandemic haven't fully come back, and that's, I think, partly responsible for me not having played this, because I did actually get this copy during the middle of the pandemic. I don't know what else to say. I recommend it. I think this is a good sort of next step game. It is not a game you should throw to people as the first game you introduce them to, but it might make sense as a game that once they've gotten their feet wet, you introduce them to show them something a little bit deeper that's still going to play in a reliably hour-ish amount of time. So that's the game. That's Small World. Check it out. And be Dragon Master Tridents. That's clearly the ones to be. My number 85 is Camel Up. This is the second edition, and you can tell because there's no ambiguity about whether it's Camel Up or Camel Cup. It kind of just is Camel Up. Its previous rank was 89, so this has actually gone slightly up, which is actually quite the improvement. Because, again, a bunch of new games have gone up, so going up even slightly is actually quite the improvement. Its weight is about a 3 out of 10, and it will play 3 to 8 players. Camel Up is a great betting game. You are betting on the camels. You aren't one of the camels individually. You can bet on them for a leg, which means you're going to get some short-term rewards, or you can bet on them to either outright win or outright lose the race, which will give you a big reward, but only if you're right and only if you're fast enough that you do it before other people correctly pick the overall winner or the overall loser. You can play with anyone. I think there's more game to this than I initially gave it credit for, which is probably why it's risen from a game that I thought was good but not really on my radar for my top 100 to sneaking in, which it sort of did on the last list. Like, if I was doing a top 100 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, this probably wouldn't have been anywhere near my list. But it's one of the few games where my rating for it has actually gone up. And it's one of the few games that I've sort of gotten more plays more frequently as time has gone on. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of unpredictable. There's a fair amount of randomness, but it doesn't overstay its welcome for the amount of randomness that's involved. And the randomness is genuinely entertaining, and it never feels like it's purposeless. Like there's just meaning. It's kicking you when you're down for no reason. It's kicking you when you're down for a reason, and that's so much better. The reason being, it's funny for the rest of the table to watch. And honestly, it's a game where the tone is light enough that you can laugh at yourself. That if you kind of get screwed over by very poor luck and have things go deeply awry for you and you start losing money as a result, it just feels like something kind of funny and entertaining. But there's enough predictability to it that you can feel like you're making smart plays and that you're making probabilistically prudent choices, and that you can give yourself a higher percentage chance of winning than just random dice might let you do otherwise. So I think for that reason, it's a game that sort of hung around as something kind of crazy and fun and light and easy to play with potentially large groups of people. Very strong game. This is definitely a gateway style game, and although I rate the complexity a 3, this is one of those games that, as long as you know what you're doing and have read the rulebook fairly thoroughly, which isn't a terribly long rulebook and it's a decent one, you can kind of guide people through it. It doesn't matter that it's like a little bit more complex than some of your dirt simple introductory games, because you can genuinely help people and kind of guide them through their decisions, and it doesn't feel too difficult for you to do that. So this is a great sort of gateway game to use. And yeah, I've just tended to enjoy it more as time has gone on. So that is my number 85, Camel Up. My number 84 is the Quack Quedlingberg, which is previously ranked at 50, so it's dropped a decent amount. Its weight is about a 4 out of 10, and it plays 2 to 4 players. The Quack Quedlingberg is a great push-your-luck game. It is purely a push-your-luck game in that if there's anything else in the game, it is simply in service of the push-your-luck element. You are doing some bag building, and you can build a bag where you could theoretically have a phenomenal chance of success, and then you just pull the wrong chips and you blow up anyway. It can happen. There's a lot that I like about this. This is a great sort of introductory plus game. It's not the first game I would show to new players, but it is among the first that I would show to new players, and it is a game that I think I would use if I'm wanting to step out the complexity a little bit, if they've already played something like Carcassonne. Quack Quedlingberg is about potions. Your quack doctor is making potions, and those potions need to have as few cherry bombs as possible. Cherry bombs are just the white chips. The white chips, if they reach a certain threshold, which is 8 or more, then your pot explodes, and then you have to choose between getting the points at the place that you stopped and blew up, or getting the money at the place you stopped or blew up, but not both. If you stop, you get to get both things. It's a great game. My main criticism is that if you fall behind by enough, although there is a game catch-up mechanism, it is possible for the people ahead to do well enough that there's no way for you to catch up. So if you fall behind by, say, like 15 points, and it's the 7th round that you're entering, you've got 3 more rounds left because it ends with the 9th. If you gain 3 points on them in round 7, 5 points on them in round 8, and another 6 points on them in round and another 4 points on them. It's not enough, right? Because you were only gaining those few amounts of points because you did very slightly better than them in those final 3 rounds. So if they have a decent lead, they can just do well enough, and that's all they need to protect their lead. There's no real way to completely have an amazing round that shoots you straight to the top, and that's kind of frustrating because it means if you're sitting on enough of a gap between yourself and the person who's in the lead, there may not be a way for you to catch up unless they choose to like pull and push their luck very rashly, and that is kind of frustrating. It's not heavy enough a game that is a huge concern, but it's enough that it probably bumps this down. There's another game coming up on my list that sort of takes what this game does and adds another major element to it that I find more entertaining, that I very recently started playing. But we'll talk about that game when it comes up. For now, this is a great game to play if you just need something that is going to be entertaining, to give you some strategic decisions to make, and also just the element of, that's the last thing I needed. Whoops. If you find it entertaining when that happens to people, you're going to like Quack's Quedlinburg. So, that is my number 84. The Quacks of Quedlinburg. My number 83 is Sheriff of Nottingham, a game I don't have. This is owned by my parents. They own the first edition, not the second edition. Its previous ranking was 29, so it's taken quite a tumble for me. Its weight is about a 3 out of 10, and it plays 3 to 6 players if you have the expansion. If you don't have the expansion, it only plays 5. Although that may not be true in the newer edition. The newer edition may play 6 players out of the box. Sheriff of Nottingham is almost a party game. It's a game in which you are passing things off in your bag, and you're telling them that it's all completely legal and that it's all the same good, and the only thing that you cannot lie about is the actual quantity in the bag. If you put 4 cards in the bag, you have to claim they're 4 of something, whether or not that is actually accurate. You can't lie about the actual quantity. So you say you've got 4 bread in there, but unfortunately only 2 of those cards are bread, one of them is a crossbow, and the other one is a forbidden piece of cheese, because as we all know, the most exotic and tasty of cheese is the forbidden ones. Then the game basically becomes, you can do any amount of bribing or negotiation with the person who's inspecting the bag to let it pass, or psychological mind games to, again, let you pass. If they open it and it turns out you're lying, as I cited in my previous example, the cards that you were lying about, the cheese and the crossbow, as I mentioned, the forbidden cheese, those cards will have a specific penalty on which you will have to pay to the person who was inspecting. However, if you were truthful and there were 4 breads and they were all perfectly legal breads, then then the person who's opening the bag has to then give you a penalty. So there's this constant tug of war in your psyche over, if you're the person inspecting the bags, do you believe them? Are they just trying to goad you into opening it because they know that the 4 breads that they claimed are actually 4 breads and they're just trying to make you suspicious of them? Or do they have some contraband stuff in there? At what point will you take enough of a bribe that you'll just let it go anyway? These are the elements that are involved in the game. Plus, you can get involved in like other people's situations. So you can bribe the sheriff to open someone else's bag. That's perfectly legit in this game. You can also offer deals based on what's in a bag, and you can lie. It's like, well, I'll give you the crossbow that is actually in my bag. And then it turns out there is no crossbow in there, and then you just don't give them anything. But otherwise, you have to go by your word. It's entertaining. I feel like it is a little one-note at this point, which is probably the reason why it's tumbled down my list as much as it has. But it's still a great time whenever I play it, and it's still a favorite of my family's. I just kind of wish there was more incentive to risk big. because I think you can do quite well just by keeping going with legal goods, because you can get bonuses for having the most of a legal good. Anyways, still a very solid game, very funny. Sheriff of Nottingham, my number 83. My number 82 is Crown of Amara, which is new to my list. Its weight is about a 6 out of 10 and is 2 to 4 players. I played this at 2. And Crown of Amara is something of a throwback Euro. It feels like a Euro that was designed about 10 years ago. It's a little bit older looking. It has a more traditional sort of gentle pastel, almost Clemens Franz style artwork to it. It might actually be illustrated by Clemens Franz. I would have to... No, it is not. Okay, but it very much looks like something he would have done, so in the sort of Agricola kind of area of work, that kind of art. It's 2 rondelles, and they're not terribly complicated rondelles. They each have 4 spaces in them. One gets you resources. The other rondelle lets you chew things up for points in various ways. And there's just little different levers to it. It's very dry. It's very abstract. But I just think it's a fun game that is a nice sort of throwback to when Euro games were not dedicated to being the most complex spreadsheet of game. Now, I still like those kinds of games. In fact, I would say I almost like them better than that. But there's a part of me that does miss this style of game, even though this was published in 2018, so it's actually a more recent one. Would I recommend this? Yes, if you like Euro games. If you like Euro games, this might be one that you really click with. I think it's a well done one. But maybe it's a good sort of gateway into if you might like some older Euro games, like maybe something like Hansa Teutonica might be the kind of game that I have in mind. You might like maybe some of Uwe Rosenberg's older games. This could be a good insight into that, and also sort of the weight class that used to be considered a heavier Euro. I would consider this a midweight game, but I don't know. I think a decade ago, or maybe a little longer, this kind of game would have been seen as sort of like a more heavier style game. Just because I think games have gotten more complex over the past 5 to 10 years. It's very good, but it's also very middle of the road for that sort of throwback style Euro game, which it is. So I recommend it. Give it a try. My number 82, Crown of Amara. My number 81, and this is just an example game. I wouldn't even recommend this particular box. Is the Exit series. So there are games that are called Exit the Game, published by Cosmos, and this one just happens to be a jigsaw puzzle themed one where part of the game is like putting together jigsaw puzzles and then using the visuals on those jigsaw puzzles to solve the clues. If that sounds interesting, I don't recommend this one. I recommend the other one, which is called The Sacred Temple. That one's very fun. This one I had major problems with. And that leads into something else about this. This is not the first series that I would recommend in terms of what are called escape room in a box games. It is the second one. The other one we'll get to in a bit. By the way, this is new to my list. Its weight is about a 2 out of 10 in terms of complexity, and it plays 1 to 4 players, typically. Okay, here's the downside. This series is inconsistent. It is this high on my list because the highs are very high. It is this low on my list because the lows are pretty low. This is one of the low examples, honestly, actually. They can be terribly fun. They can have extremely clever puzzles. They can have you doing stuff that will make you go, wow, that was amazing. And then sometimes they make you do stuff that just doesn't work. like you're cutting out pieces and you're putting things together, and then it just doesn't stand up right, and then the puzzle doesn't work properly as a result, and then you have to look up the solution anyway, and then do what the solution says, and then you just bypass what was supposed to be like a major event. And then sometimes some of them work really well. You really need to look up with this series individually how well rated each of them were. You might want to try the Western set one. You might want to try the Dead Man on the Orient Express one. You might want to try the Secret Laboratory one, which was one of the first ones that came out. There are several ones that were genuinely great and terrific experiences. The Sacred Temple is probably my favorite of all of them. And then they just get frustrating sometimes. I haven't even gotten close to playing this complete series. There are a lot of them that I haven't played. I have played less than half of them. I'm reluctant to hunt down the rest because the experiences have been so uneven. But the good ones have been so good that they have to make my top 100. Maybe just this year. Maybe in future years I'm going to exclude them. But there is another series, which I'll talk about later, that is much more consistent, that delivers the experience and doesn't have the lows are fewer and they're not as low as they are in this series. So I'm recommending them with a caution. I would say if you haven't watched and found out what the other series I'm talking about is that does escape rooms in a box, figure out what that other one is. I'm not going to spoil it here because I don't want to spoil the rest of my list. I think I've already done that anyway. But it doesn't matter. The important thing is go for the other one first, whatever it may be. And especially if it's ends with an awk and starts with an unla. Yeah. Good thing I didn't give it away. My number 81, the Exit series. Mixed feelings, but the good ones are just so good. And that is my number 90 through 81. Creature Comforts, Need of Lair, Heaven and Nail, Blood Rage, Small World, Camel Up, The Quack Sequedlingberg, Sheriff of Nottingham, the version I played in first edition, Crown of Amara, and the Exit the Game series. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you on the next list.